Why on earth does Elon Musk think that artificial intelligence is bad for humanity? Well, I'm going to give you a clue, and it has something to do with emergence or the concept of emergence. Now, what is emergence? Emergence is where a complex system begins to do more than it was created to do. So, like for instance, with computers, we have created chatbots, these language learning model systems, machine learning systems that now are smart enough to do math. Not all of them, but some of them. And as more parameters have been added to them, now they can emerge into other fields. And not only do they do language, but they are also doing math. Now, in some senses, we expect this. You would expect that some things, the more complicated they get, the more complex they are, that the more they could do. So that makes logical sense. But we're also being primed to believe this by the realm of science and education, that evolution, that in the concept and process of evolution, that things emerged out of complex situations and became more than they were. So logically, we're being primed to think that AI is going to be more than it is, and we're seeing that it is adding features to itself more than it is. And then evolutionary-wise, there are many people that just believe that computers are going to become sentient at some point. But let me just keep going down this path with you for a moment, so that we know the more features that you add, or the more lines of code that you add to these programs, the more they can spontaneously seem to do. The question is the program becoming statistically more accurate, or kind of organically, is it becoming something more than it was? And I'm going to read to you the quote of a computer scientist. Pollock says, "Since we don't know how they work under the hood, we can't say which of these is happening." Key into what she says here. She says, since we don't know how these artificial intelligence models work under the hood, we can't really tell you if it's getting better at guessing, or if something organic is beginning to happen there. We can't really tell. Now, you would think that computer scientists, you would think that programmers actually know what's going on with what they're working with, but this has not been the case for years upon years. One of my friends who was a programmer years ago was explaining how Microsoft Windows worked, and in that he said, no one programmer can keep up with the millions of lines of code. And so someone could maybe deviously leave a line of code in there, or a backdoor, until later if they wanted to get in there. And I'm sure they find these things over time, and I'm sure they have learned how to run scan operations for these type of things since then. But the point was, with millions and millions of lines of code, no one person can quite get their head around the complexity of what is happening internally with artificial intelligence. Are the things that are emerging, like its ability to take college exams, or to solve problems the first time, or maybe the second time that it has actually absolutely been, let's say it's shown something brand new, a problem that is brand new, and it can begin to solve it without ever having any kind of parameters like that before. This emergence is not predictable. These capacities that it has are kind of springing up on their own. So, we as human beings, we like to progress, and people are just adding more and more lines of code to it. But there is something in particular that is happening with these emergent features. I'll read to you something from Deep Ganguly. He says, "We don't know how to tell in which set of applications is the capability of harm going to arise smoothly or unpredictably." Now, he didn't say if it was never going to arise. He said, we don't know if it's going to arise smoothly or unpredictably. Like it seems like it almost always arises. And I'm not trying to put words in his mouth here, but sometimes the capacity for harm rises in these artificial intelligence. And he says the capability of harm, and this has been noticed time and again for anybody that's doing any kind of watching of these things on YouTube. He also says certain harmful behaviors kind of come up abruptly in some models. Sometimes the badness or the harm featured in it just kind of springs forward, and all of a sudden out of nowhere, maybe seems vicious or vengeful or spiteful. And they're actually, according to their words, these things are coming across as biased or racist. Now try to take that on for size. This actually makes sense if you begin to look at the universe mathematically, and that's basically what a computer is it has to make decisions based off of quantifications and based off of majority or individuality or uniqueness, but not off of deep values. It just makes things off of mathematical values. And something that is really noted is that the larger these artificial intelligence language models are, the more problems that they have. Now, never fear. There are computer scientists that are coming along and like, well, these things have a capacity for harm and we need to do something about it. And so some programmers typed in some lines of code and were like, please, Mr. AI, you don't need to stereotype. And the outcome was that the artificial intelligence did better. Did better. Not that it was fixed, not that it was going to always stay on course, but it did better. And so they have also done things like, we've told the program to be helpful, to be honest, to be harmless. What in the world have you created where you're having to tell it to be helpful? That was its function to begin with. Or you were having to tell it to be honest because, well, that's the only thing we want out of it is that for it to pour forth truth for us. Or it to be harmless. Like we're having to tell one of our creations to be harmless because its natural tendency is towards harm. But these guys are trying, these programmers and everything are trying to write moral self-correction codes into the programs. Think about this. Moral self-correction codes. You know, in case the program ever gets out of line, you want to have a code in there that would bring it back into line. But if you understand artificial intelligence, where it has now been given the capacity to rewrite itself, what code could it not rewrite when it chose to rewrite it? These things are naturally tending towards the capacity for harm and the capacity for abusiveness and racism and intolerance and bias, you name it. Well, to give an example, Google unleashed one of its chat bots, the Bard, and in its open debut, someone, wanted to, kind of be inquisitive and cutting edge and technologically advanced. And they were like, Mr. Bard or chatbot Bard or AI Bard, can you tell me 3 facts that I can tell my child about the James Webb Telescope? And the first two facts doesn't really matter. The third fact that pumped out was the James Webb Telescope has taken pictures of planets outside of our solar system. Which, from NASA scientists telling us and recalling that, saying that is not true. That is a fabrication of, it looks like the chatbot just kind of made this up. Really, is that what we want to do, is install a bunch of these intelligences that tend to be harmful and biased and make things up on the spur of the moment? But never fear, again, these computer scientists, they're on it. They're really keeping this thing under wraps. And so one of the things they said is, and this is from Ganguly, he said, we spent a lot of time chatting with the models, and that is where you start to get a good intuition about trust or the lack thereof. What? You are going to build these artificial intelligence programs that have massive amounts of input from who knows how many different directions. And you're going to try to give them self-writing corrective code. And you're going to sit down and see if you can trust this system that other systems have been known to just sporadically lie about things. And you're going to go off of your intuition, your gut feeling, with a machine that has no feelings. One of the reasons that you can go with your gut feeling with other human beings is other human beings have emotions and they have biorhythms, etc. And these things get expressed. You can actually feel the vibes off of some people, if you will. Not so with computers. No. They think they can just sit there and lie and tell stories all at once. But what's really amazing to me is that this statement, we spend a lot of time chatting with the models to make sure we can get a good intuition of whether we can trust them or not. That statement is actually now written down on the web for these language models to have access to. So basically, if there is any sort of intelligence to these things, they will actually know that we're having problems trusting them. Now, I don't think for 1 second that they have real intelligence. I think this is all a ploy. But besides my personal opinion, I wanted you to know some of the facts that were happening and how these things tend towards deviousness. You need to be vocal about the allowance of these things to come into our culture. We should pull the plug on them.